Okay, so I love this question, and it's actually gonna tie back to somebody very special in my life. So I didn't have a traditional grandparent figure like growing up, but my grandparent figure was actually my mom's best friend, who went by Natacha. So Natacha was gay and was a drag queen when he was younger, right? So Natachita. So the term of endearment. So for those that are not Latino, we add ita to everything to make it like sweet and dear to us. So Natachita, whose actual name was Herman. So Natachita was the grandparent figure in my life. And I will never forget, there's something he used to say all the time, which was, para morir nacimos. And the literal translation is that was like, we were born to die, right? But like the real meaning behind that is like, around not being fearful of death, right? That like eventually that's where we will all end up. So don't focus on that, focus on living, right? Like focus on today, like every day, right? Like it's funny, Gary says it all the time, like every day is a gift, but it is, right? Like today was a good day because I woke up today, because I was able to do stuff today. So it was more so like, don't worry about the thing that you can't control. Like that's gonna happen to all of us. So why spend our energy there? Like let's focus on living while we have the life, because we don't have it forever. One of the things that always stuck with me was respect for our elders. Like I think that's, you know, that there are lessons to be learned there, that there's importance in knowing like the struggles that they went through, right? Like we often talk about the struggles of being first generation, right? Mis padres vinieron aquí, mi papá de Chile, mi mamá del Peru. But there's also the struggles that our family had like in their countries, right? Like it's knowing that my great-great-grandmother raised her children on her own. There was no male figure, right? That she would save her money, that she would go and like buy a cow, basically, or a goat, whatever like meat, right? Whatever animal that created meat that she could afford. She would save her money, she would buy an animal. She would, of course, like, you know, butcher it and like, she would dry it out and make jerky. So we're talking like rural Peru, right? Like drying out the meat. She would then buy corn. She would toast the corn, which we call cancha, right? And she would make these sacks of toasted corn with jerky tossed into that. And then she would sell that at the market. She was an entrepreneur. She never would have like referred to herself as that, but that's what she was, right? Like she was hustling to make money for her family. She was raising like a lot of her grandchildren and like helping to raise, you know, the children like more broadly so that other people could go out and work and stuff. And so I feel like just having access to those kinds of stories and like what it tells you about where you come from, what you're capable of, like what we are capable of as people, right? Like if my family could accomplish that with no education and no family wealth, right? Like no family name to be made, like what am I capable of given that I've started in a very different place than they have? Like what am I capable of given that I have had like the benefit and the privilege of, you know, higher education and advanced degrees and, you know, the benefit of speaking 2 languages. Like I should be able to do so much more, but never forget where I come from, because that's also what keeps me humble, right? And to always give back and create more opportunity in our community. Yeah, so representation has always mattered to me. So my first career was actually in higher education. So I used to work at colleges and universities. And the reason that I chose to do that, so I was, you know, in my junior year of college, and I didn't know what I wanted to do next. I was a Spanish and Latin American studies major. And so Latinidad always like, right? Like, so I want to talk about that for a second, because that's representation, right? Like when people hear that I was a Spanish and Latin American studies major, they're like, ay, qué fácil, right? Like, oh, you chose the easy way out. And it's just like, no. College was the first time that I had the opportunity to take classes where I could read authors that came from Latin American countries, right? College was the first time that I could take history courses that looked at indigenous communities in Latin American countries. It was the first time that I could like really dig into politics in Latin America, right? And also around like the Latino experience in the US and the Latino civil rights movement and its interconnections to like the larger civil rights movement. Like, I didn't get to take any of those classes as an undergrad. So when people, you know, I think people hear that and they're like, oh, why are you doing that? You already know that. And it's just like, growing up in this country, we don't get exposed to stories like ours. So college was really the first time that I could immerse myself in like learning more about my culture, right? And so it was a fantastic foundation to be more vocal and to be an advocate later in my career. So I chose to work in higher education because I didn't want to work in corporate America at the time. And I was in a Latina sorority, and one of my sorority sisters was going back to school for her master's degree in higher education. And I was like, can you, what is that? You know, what are you going to study and what does that set you up for? And she said, I want to work in diversity affairs at a university, and those roles require a master's degree in education. So I'm going to go, and you learn counseling and you learn about like the theories behind how students individually develop, how groups develop, like how to get them to be better leaders, right? Like, what are the struggles that like college students encounter and like how do you support them? I was like, that sounds amazing. But what really struck a chord with me was that when I looked at college, there were a couple things. One is the things that were most poignant for me and the things that made me feel most connected in college were the Latino activities, because I felt seen and I felt understood and I felt supported, right? Like, the other important thing is I didn't ask for help because nobody looked like me and I feared judgment. Because when you're a Latino student, when you look like a Latino student or a Black student or an Asian student at a university, the presumption is you don't deserve to be there. You got help to be there. And so you're constantly like trying to battle this assumption that you know people have about you being there. And so it makes it harder to ask for help. So anyhow, I thought, if I could be a Latina and work at a university and just help like one me that's a freshman to see somebody that looks like them, that they think might understand them, that then makes them more likely to ask for help, then that's a worthwhile thing. And that's the truth everywhere, right? Like, I feel like we have to see people that look like us in different leadership roles and different types of careers, because that signals to us that we're welcome in that kind of environment, right? That we are capable, that there are people like us, that those doors are open to, so you have to see it to believe it. Now, in terms of like stating your opinion, I'm very comfortable stating my opinion, but I'm also like, I'm more seasoned, right? Like, I've been a professional for like 25 years of my life, if not more, right? And I've also been in this company for like over 9 years. And so I don't let anything go unsaid. But I also realize it's not about what I want, it's also finding the balance between like what I think people collectively here need, right? Like what our communities collectively here need, but also how we balance that with what the organization is actually here to do, right? So I think it's a conversation, I think it's collaboration. I think that's definitely harder to do when you're younger, right? Like, and just first starting out, but I also tell people, if you're hesitating with sharing like your opinion about something, it's better to share it and like know where you stand, and more importantly, know where the organization stands. If you're gonna get alienated for speaking about your experience and like how you took something, right? Like, and not actually gonna be able to have a productive conversation about that, then maybe that's not a place where you should be working, right? Like, and you should want to know that sooner rather than later. So this one actually came up in conversation for me last week, and I think as a New Yorker, which you pointed out, I think is a really cool one that people don't realize. So Arturo Schomburg. Arturo Schomburg was an Afro-Puerto Riqueño in New York City. And I would try to do dates, but I would totally muck up dates. But like, we're talking a very long time ago. So Arturo Schomburg was super interested in like pulling together information around like the Afro-Latino experience and like arts and music and like history and all of the diaspora. People in New York City might know the name. So there's actually a Schomburg Center in Harlem that has exhibits. So it is like a museum that you can go to. They put on a ton of programming. But people often forget that he was Latino because the Institute is in Harlem, like it often gets forgotten because of course people struggle with like Latinidad, right? Like ethnicity versus race. And it's just like Latinos can look like anything. And so I don't think that he often gets credit for like being Afro-Latino. But again, to like be talking about Afro-Latinidad in like 1800s New York City, I'm probably messing up the date, but people can go look him up and like correct it. It's pretty amazing. Oh my gosh. So this is hard because, right, like I have the Peruvian side of my family and the Chilean side of my family, but it also gets complicated because I grew up going to a Mexican church. I went to Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe. So I grew up around Mexican food a ton. And when my mom came to this country, she was taken care of by a Puerto Rican woman. And most of my Peruvian uncles are married to Puerto Rican women. So Puerto Rican food was always, like my mom made pernil, arroz con gandules, and like I have sofrito in my fridge. So it's a really, really hard question. But there are a few things that I want to make sure I eat during the holidays. Always pernil and arroz con gandules because it's like a symbol of the holidays. And I also make pasteles with my best friend's family. They're Puerto Rican, and so like we go and help, and so pasteles are also part of it. But then like, you know, flan, which is like universal, I think, for Latinos and is a lot of effort. So like I don't really make it other than on the holidays. Anything else, like, oh my gosh, all the like yummy beverages, it's all gonna be Puerto Rican food, and people are gonna be like, but you're not Puerto Rican. But I'm like, but it's so good. I'm trying to think. Oh my God, it's bad. I'm not gonna name any Peruvian food, but people should also, if they want to, Peruvian food is freaking delicious and like all time of year. So like lomo saltado and ceviche. And Chilean food, pastel de choclo. So this is a good one. It's like if you've had a shepherd's pie, right, which is like mashed potato and like meat. Chilean pastel de choclo is actually like corn with like shredded chicken and meat, like what you would find in an empanada with like raisins and stuff, and then like more corn on top, and you eat it. It's delicious. This is a really hard question because I could take it in a bunch of different ways, right? I think the important thing is, so it's, right, like we've used the term, I've used a bunch of terminology. I've said Latinidad, right? Like, I think it's, first of all, that we're so different generationally, right? Like we're so different based on like the experiences that we come from, right? Like there are still new immigrants into this country. At the same time, you have Latinos, Hispanics, Latinx, Latine, right? Like whatever they identify as, who have been in this country before this country existed. So I'll dwell there, right? Like I have had people, I've had the pleasure of hearing people say like, speak English, you're in America, right? If like I've had it said in my face, or either to me directly, or I've heard people make that comment like around me. And I love calling out like, there is no national language in this country. There isn't one. And so, right, so first of all, it's false to believe that English is the national language because we don't actually have one in this country. Secondly, I love educating folks that Spanish has been spoken in this land that we now call the United States longer than English has. Because many of the parts of this country were actually part of Mexico. And first of all, indigenous languages have been spoken much longer on this land than anything else, right? Like, if we're gonna adopt this like English only rhetoric, are we gonna change the names of states that are actually Spanish? Colorado, Nevada, California, Florida. Those are Spanish words, right? Like this, that describe those places, or what like the people who came from Spain to those countries that were inhabited by other people were. So I want people to recognize that like Latinidad is at the root of this country, is at the root of this land before this country existed, right? And that we should like embrace that, because at the end of the day, this country is different, whatever snapshot you look at, based on the people who have come here closest in that period of time, right? Like, so I think I want people to understand that like, it is very easy to think about Latinos in this country and immediately go to a place about having a conversation around immigration. But it's like, our history here is very long and very diverse, and we didn't all come here from the same places, right? Like, you and I can have a conversation in Spanish and we're gonna have completely different slang. And it depends on whether I'm leaning into like Peruvian slang, Chilean slang, Puerto Rican slang, right? Like Mexican slang that I use with my friends from the West Coast. Like, our language also isn't universal the same way that like English in the United States is not the same as English in Britain. You know, I think I look at things from a different perspective. So I look at things from the lens of like, how would my parents have thought about that content versus how I think about it versus my niece, who's, you know, a different generation than me. So one, I think it prompts me to look at it through that lens. It prompts me to look at it through a lens of a person of color, right? Like, so I think it just helps me have different perspectives. And at the end of the day, the work is better when we're looking at it through a variety of different perspectives, because there may be things that we miss, right? Like, because our experiences are limited. So the more people we have, like, thinking through content and concepts, like, the better I think it's gonna resonate. So in my family, because I can't speak to everybody's, but in my Latino family, like, they're big, they're fun, they're warm, right? There's always food, there's always like some sense of music. So it's joy, right? Like, I never walk away from a family event, especially during the holidays. Like, I walk away from them feeling full, right? Like my soul is full. Like my happy meter, my love meter are all at full, and like, it helps me like bring that into other aspects of my life. I am Maribel Lara. I am of Peruvian and Chilean descent, y yo soy Vayner.